Hello there, thrill seekers. And today's topic kind of dovetails with yesterday's topic of talking about Thich Nhat Hanh. And I was kind of not surprised, but surprised about the vitriol that's expressed by some of the comments in the comments section. Uh, I knew it was dangerous to say anything about Thich Nhat Hanh that wasn't just lauding him to the skies. But if you'll actually watch the video again and pay attention, I'm not really saying anything very critical about Thich Nhat Hanh himself. As far as I can tell, he seemed like a really nice guy and very intelligent and well-spoken and able to convey his message of the Dharma very clearly in a language that wasn't his first language. It's pretty impressive stuff. But it's this kind of myth-making thing that you can see going on around somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh that makes people very sensitive about it, and they take any criticism, which, as I say, I wasn't even critical of Thich Nhat Hanh, of their heroes as a criticism of themselves. And I think we got to watch that sort of thing. So, the thing I wanted to talk about, which I've been wanting to talk about for a few days now, and I keep putting it off, is this article. This showed up 20 years ago, but somebody sent it to me recently, and I believe I did see this and maybe even wrote a blog about it 20 years ago when it was new, but I haven't seen it since then. And I think it's an interesting article. It's called Richard Baker and the Myth of the Zen Roshi, and it's written by, let's see, Stuart Lachs, Lachs, in October 2002, which is hard to believe that's 20 years ago, but that is 20 years ago. Well, not quite 20 because it's not October yet, but a while ago. And it's about the myth of the Zen Roshi. And this has kind of been a perennial problem in the whole Zen system. Now, Stuart Lachs takes a very I think he gets a little bit too harsh, but I think the problems he brings up are pretty interesting, and the article is incredibly long, so I've just highlighted some parts, and I'll go over them. And if I can find the link again, which is always a bit of a struggle, I will put a link below to the article in if you're watching on YouTube. But again, it's on the Zen site, and it's called Richard Baker and the Myth of the Zen Roshi if you want to go look it up. So in the introduction, he says, "The fact is that almost everything about Zen's presentation, practice, and rituals is aimed at producing people who give up their good sense with the promise of a greater gain in the future." That's his premise right from the start. And it's an interesting premise because I feel like that's precisely the opposite of at least Zen in the way that it was presented to me and the way I took it in and the way I, at best I can, try to convey it. It's not about giving up your greater good sense for a promise of a greater gain in the future. Sorry, I said greater twice. Here's another line. "This is not simply that there is no value to be gained in the practice of Zen," well, at least he says that. "It simply means that a power structure has evolved that will perpetuate itself even if it means imputing attainment," in quotes, "to people who don't really have it." So, the point of this is about, as I said in the title, or as it says in the title, the myth of the Zen Roshi. So, there is an idea that if you are a Zen Roshi, a master, a transmitted person like I am, like yours truly right here, this idiot staring at you on your computer screen right now, that means you are an heir to the attainment of Buddha himself and are the equal of Buddha himself. Now, if I went around presenting myself as the equal of Buddha himself, people would laugh at me, and rightly so. And so it is a myth, but okay, so let's just keep going. I'm skipping a lot of this. He's talking mostly about Richard Baker, who received Dharma transmission from Shunryu Suzuki, and there's a book called Shoes Outside the Door, which goes into all the problems that happened after Suzuki Roshi died and left Richard Baker in charge. So a lot of this book references that, and if you don't know that background, well, what I'm going to say probably won't make much sense, but I'll assume most people reading this at least have some idea of what happened. For some 30 years, a significant group of scholars have been investigating the development of the Chan sect in Chinese Buddhism. Chan is the same as Zen. They have shown us clearly that much of what has been presented in the tradition as history, in quotes, is really a myth created with two purposes. And I would say all of history is mythology, but we try our best. I was a history major in college, and becoming a history major made me really see that history is mostly myth-making, and you hope for a certain amount of truth, but that is an evasive quality. One of the purposes of this myth-making was to make the Chinese state, consider Chan, Zen, the primary sect of Buddhism. The other was to establish Chan's primacy over the indigenous teachings of Confucianism and Taoism in the eyes of the state and the society. The same myth was later used in Japan. Likewise, Dharma transmission was as much about institutional property, prestige, authority, continuity, and acceptance and control by imperial authorities as it was about notions of enlightenment and spiritual perfection. So that's definitely true. Dharma transmission has been historically given for a lot of reasons, and only one of those many reasons is that a person who has a kind of realization in the Zen sense feels that a student has equal realization and will carry on the tradition faithfully. Sorry, I mentioned Ziggy was sick, and now he's standing over here sort of making coughing noises, but I think he's okay. He seems to be okay, but he did barf up yesterday pretty bad. Anyway, but Ziggy seems to be okay. Now, so a lot of reasons, and of course the most common reason that I've talked about in this channel before is father-to-son transmission in order to keep a temple within the family and keep running it as a family business, more or less. In the 1960s and 70s, San Francisco Zen Center students, like most other Zen students in the USA, thoroughly accepted, among a range of glaring historical inaccuracies, the idealistic Zen rhetoric, including the notion that Dharma transmission is only about spiritual attainment, that all Roshis are essentially equal, and that Zen institutions in East Asia are apolitical and divorced from the state. So all that is not true, but that was widely accepted, and that's true. I think this happened because Zen's teaching to avoid words and explanation was taken too literally and has fostered an unfortunate narrowing of perspective. In the case of Zen, students usually come to the teacher with a set of preconceptions acquired mostly through reading about the fully attained Zen Master being virtually beyond comprehension, The historical Zen masters we have all come to know are always presented in terms of supposedly real people with names, dates, and locations, and reports of purportedly real conversations and interactions with other monks and so forth, so they're presented as real people. I believe that the trouble at San Francisco Zen Center and at many other prominent Zen centers across the country to this day is caused by a lack of understanding as to how the ideas of Dharma transmission, unbroken lineage, and Zen Master have been used historically. And here is a quote from Trudy Dixon, the editor of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, about what a Roshi is. A Roshi is a person who has actualized that perfect freedom which is the potentiality for all human beings. He exists freely in the fullness of his whole being. The flow of his consciousness is not the fixed, repetitive patterns of our usual self-centered consciousness, but rather arises spontaneously and naturally from the actual circumstances of the present. The result of this in terms of the quality of his life are extraordinary buoyancy, vigor, straightforwardness, simplicity, humility, security, joyousness, uncanny perspicacity, I never understood what that word meant, and unfathomable compassion. So, now that you've digested all of those words about what a Roshi is, think about this. I am technically a Roshi. Now, I should mention that word Roshi. I don't use the word Roshi for myself for several reasons. One of them is it means old teacher, and well, I'm getting old, but I'm not. I don't feel like quite old enough to be called old teacher. But the other reason is it's an honorific in Japanese, and I lived in Japan for 11 years, so I got really, steeped in Japanese culture, and in Japan, you would never call yourself a Roshi. That would be like it's something somebody else calls you. So somebody else can call you the world's greatest lover, but if I go around and saying, "Hi, I'm Brad Warner, world's greatest lover," that sounds ridiculous. Same thing with Roshi. It sounds ridiculous to me when people say, "Hi, I am, name insert name here, Roshi." I just like, oh, please don't do that. It's like nails on a chalkboard to me. So I don't use that term. But I am qualified to use that term. So, do I seem like a person is perfect freedom? What the hell? Oh, sorry. Oh God. Now I lost it. Okay. A person is actually has perfect freedom and spontaneous, natural buoyancy, vigor, straightforwardness, simplicity. All the people who commented on my Thich Nhat Hanh piece can tell you I'm not that, and none of us are that. And so this is a myth, and the author of this feels that this myth is actually being phrased in a particular way so that rather than saying Suzuki Roshi is a person who is blah blah blah, it's saying a Roshi so that it could be applied also to Baker Roshi, to Richard Baker, who was about to take over when the book was printed. So as to carry on that myth. And it talks about real transmissions as opposed to institutional transmissions or father-son transmissions. And really, like I said, it's a very long article, and there's a lot there, so I encourage you to read it. I don't think he's entirely correct, but I think he's making some really important points, which is that we're all people. For example, we'll go back to talking about Thich Nhat Hanh and making everybody hate me even more. But you can see the myth being constructed right now around Thich Nhat Hanh, and usually right after the person dies, the machinery goes into action, and it's very strong, trying to create this myth. But after a while, holes get poked in it. I mean, that's what happens in the modern era, in our current era. And a good example being Mother Teresa, right? Everybody, I grew up with the idea of Mother Teresa was a saint, was a modern day saint, and was purely good. And there was nothing bad about Mother Teresa. Just like there's nothing good about Adolf Hitler, there was nothing bad about Mother Teresa. Well, if you go on the internet and start searching Mother Teresa, you'll find that there's a lot of stuff there that's come out since she died about some questionable practices, and I have no stake in the game. I'm not trying to express an opinion about Mother Teresa or about Thich Nhat Hanh even. I'm just saying that these things come out and you find out that they were people and that they were parts of institutions, and the institutions sought to perpetuate themselves, and one of the ways the institutions perpetuated themselves is by holding up this figure, Mother Teresa, in the case of Mother Teresa, or Thich Nhat Hanh, or whoever they hold up as this superhuman figure, and say, this is who we believe in, this superhuman figure, and this superhuman figure is untouchable, therefore our institution is untouchable, and therefore, follow us and join us and do all our things. Which, is again not the same as me trying to say Thich Nhat Hanh was a terrible person, or even saying Mother Teresa was a terrible person, because I haven't read all the stuff about Mother Teresa. So again, I don't know if she was a terrible person or a great person. But I do know that the myth around her has fallen apart. And, what do we do with these myths? One thing I think is important to realize is that nobody is the embodiment of these myths. One of my projects I keep trying to do and never getting very far in is trying to write about Jesus, because my belief is that even Jesus wasn't Jesus. like if you could go back and do the sort of if we could look at Jesus the way we look at a modern person, we'd find out, oh yeah, he did this and he did that and the other thing, which doesn't mean that he was a no good terrible person. Probably he was a nice guy and everything else, but he's not the myth. He doesn't live up to the myth. Nobody can live up to the myth. So even our modern people can't live up to the myths, and people in the past, and Dogen doesn't live up to his myth, and nobody lives up to their myth. So it's important to understand this, and I think one of the great things that has happened in Zen recently is we're dropping that. But a lot of the scandals and things that have happened are because of the myth. So everybody's elevated. You don't even need to name the particular master, the master, whoever he was, who or she, in certain cases I can think of off the top of my head, is been elevated by the students as the perfected being, and then you find out they weren't the perfected being, and then the backlash comes in which they are seen as the opposite. They're seen as the terrible person. They probably aren't even the terrible person. Somebody in the comments section said that his teacher had called Thich Nhat Hanh the Mr. Rogers of Zen. And at first it sort of seems like disparaging, but if you think about it, Mr. Rogers, I like Mr. Rogers, and I think Mr. Rogers did great things, and I think he deserves to be seen as a this very important person, but still he was a person like all of us. Thich Nhat Hanh was a person like all of us. There's stuff is going to come out about Thich Nhat Hanh. I guarantee you that will maybe make his image a little bit less in people's minds. Which will happen after he dies. It's a natural growth. I've tried to do the opposite. I put out a book called Zen Wrapped in Karma, Dipped in Chocolate, because I thought a myth might be growing up around me, really, but I did, and I was worried, and so I put all the bad things I could think of about myself into this book called Zen Wrapped in Karma, Dipped in Chocolate, to just puncture that myth before it could even get started. And maybe that's a way to do it, or maybe I'm going about it the wrong way. Maybe I should allow the myth and let people, think whatever, But it won't work with me. It just won't work. Look, I got the Kiss, stupid Kiss. Wait a minute, I'll show you what I'm wearing. This is the Kiss. Well, you can't see it. It's Ace Frehley's face. That kind of punctures the myth, not punctuates it. And my hair's all crazy. I'm getting it cut today. Anyway, that's about the myth of the Roshi, and I feel like I knew when going into this talk or into this video that I wasn't going to be able to say a definitive thing about this, and I'm sorry I haven't said a definitive thing about this. I just think it's important to have all sides of this argument, and even though I think Stuart Lax goes a bit too far in his article, I think it's good to know it. And it's also good to understand that what Stuart Lax is saying in this article applies to somebody like Suzuki Roshi, like Baker Roshi, like some other people I could mention but won't, who are trying to create something really, really big. And when you're trying to create something really, really big, you need a larger-than-life figure to be the head of it, and those larger-than-life figures, they're never really what they appear to be, and people are going to find that out eventually, and I think maybe a better policy is being, forthright about it from the beginning. But what do I know? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not a better policy. Honestly, I don't know for sure. Anyway, if you want to support modern-day myth-making around me, you can give a donation by going to the URL you are seeing on your screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. Send me some money, and I'll go hire a publicist and a bunch of people to make me seem like a saint, and it'll be great. No, I actually won't do that. I'll buy medicine and things for Ziggy. But I really appreciate your donations because they're my main means of support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't got to pay if you don't want to pay. And we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Hope you don't hate me. Bye. How you doing, Ziggy? You feeling better? I know you yacked up a little bit this morning, but you seem better. You seem overall better. So I'm glad you're getting good. Right? Feeling good? ready to take on the world. See you later, Zen.
Bye-bye.